Hi everyone, happy weekend, happy Friday. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me in this week's video. We are going to switch things up a little bit today. When I did my year in review of all the art that I did last year, I touched on my love for alcohol inks, and I showed a few pieces and I got really into it, and I think you probably all could tell that I'm very excited about alcohol inks. But I don't really show that on my channel. The reason is the algorithm doesn't like when I switch things up. Maybe I should just switch things up more often, but I also do love watercolor and doodling very much. But the two of them are just so completely different to me and the way, I approach these things, that they don't necessarily go together very well. So I am gonna do my best today and show you a little bit more of an approach that I take when it comes to alcohol ink. And I hope you're here for it, because you guys have asked me again and again after I had posted that video, please show us more of your alcohol ink. Well, I am delivering. I am delivering to you, and now you guys need to watch it, okay? Because otherwise I will not do it again. Anyway, what I would like to start with is, first of all, we need to talk about protection. And I strongly suggest that you wear good protection for your lungs, because that is a very important thing. The isopropyl alcohol that you use when you work with alcohol inks is not good for you to breathe in. So a good mask is important. It is so important. I cannot stress that enough. Basically, if you can smell the IPO, then the mask that you're wearing is not good enough for you. So I use the 3M mask, and there's filters in here that I can switch out when they get old. So this is the first step. The second step is you should protect your hands, at least the one that is holding the paper that you work with most of the time. So just at least have one hand gloved, and it could be any kind of glove. And I keep reusing these because, I don't need to really switch them out that often. If you get really messy, you should probably also think about wearing goggles. I wear glasses, so I feel like I'm protected enough that way. But, just try it out, at least with the mask and the gloved hand. Also, work in a very well ventilated room. I work right in front of a window. Sometimes if I do a larger piece and I work on it for a longer time, then I will also have an extra air purifier in here. Today, I'm not gonna have the air purifier on. It's still morning. It's cool enough for me to leave the window open, and I have the door open in my studio, so there can be a cross breeze. So it's just all about protecting yourself when you work with alcohol inks. And I just wanted to start out with that first. Next, I'm gonna talk about the papers, and I'm only going to talk about the papers today. We can get into different things later on if this is something that you guys are really interested in. There is Yupo paper, which is a synthetic paper that is non-absorbent. Yupo paper you can buy pretty much anywhere. There's this brand that I've tried. There is the Ranger brand that I have tried. But you can also use the graphics paper that is plasticized. And what I like about the graphics paper is you can actually use both sides and it cleans up really well if you make a mistake. Let me zoom you out a little bit here. If you make a mistake on this one, it will not absorb any of it. You can just wipe it clean and start over basically. And I just love this. It's also a nice size. It's a 12 by 12 inch. And you can cut it to size. And you know, you can use it however you want. It's also nice and sturdy. Whereas this paper here is really, really thin. So if you want to make bookmarks or so, I would suggest you buy the graphics paper. All of these papers and everything else that I am using today is linked in the description box, with the exception of the gold. A lot of people use a different kind of gold. I just use what I have on hand, but I'm gonna get into that shortly. I like all three of these papers, but they can get a little bit pricey. If you're just starting out, what you can also do is use photo paper. Now, let me talk about photo paper real quick, because I have gone through a couple of different types of photo papers to find the one that I really like. If you buy a brand photo paper, and the reason why this is important is because when you work on photo paper, you have to work on the back side. The front is super absorbent and it will just absorb all of the ink immediately, because, you know, when you print on photo paper, then it cannot smear. So if you work on photo paper, this would be the front that you would print your photos on, the shiny side. And then the slightly matter side is the back side. And that, for alcohol inks, works so well. I love working on photo paper. Now, because you have to work on the back side, the brand photo paper most likely has their brand printed on the back side, which doesn't really work for us, does it? So I bought the Kirkland Costco brand photo paper. It's glossy inkjet photo paper. It's just your standard run-of-the-mill photo paper. And guess what? There's nothing printed on the back, which is exactly what we like. So this would be the front, the shiny side, and the back has nothing printed on the back. So this is what I have been using for pretty much everything. The only downside is it will stain your inks once you lay them down, and sometimes when you start out you can get a little heavy-handed with the inks. It will stain the paper and you can't wipe it off clean like you could with the graphics paper. So that's the only downside. But if you're just starting out, you have, and I need to look it up how much this was. I want to say it was maybe $30, but you get 150 sheets in here. So you can go ahead and get messy and try things out for forever, and you don't have to feel like you need to be precious about your papers. So I highly recommend the Kirkland brand photo paper. And that is what we're gonna be using today. All right, so we've talked paper, we've talked personal protection. We also need to talk about protection of your workspace. You have to be super aware of where you're working when you work with alcohol inks. They stain everything. They stain your hands, they stain your surface. Do not work on your precious marble or granite. Please don't do it. Please protect your surface. I thought this mat was going to be enough, but it just also stains the mat, and so I started either putting down papers, but I have this acrylic piece that I bought. It was a leftover piece, and it's big enough for me to protect my surface underneath the paper. So this is pretty much all I use. All right, so let's talk inks real quick. I am using the Ranger alcohol inks. I have different shades. There's different brands out there. I cannot speak for those brands. This is all I'm using, and it's been working just fine. The birds are going crazy right now, so I hope you can hear that. It's really cute. Next, we need to talk about isopropyl alcohol. So IPA is what I'm gonna call it from now on because it's just easier. 99% IPA in California is a little hard to find in stores, so I have to order it on Amazon. I mainly just use 91% for what I use it for, like my backgrounds, if I want to make other things other than art. The 99% means that it will evaporate faster. I have touched on the gold, and I just mixed IPA with the gold that I have on hand. And it's just a powder that I will use and mix in with the IPA, and it works just fine. I've never used anything else, so I cannot speak for all the other golds that are out there. From what I hear is they are beautiful and they work really well. This is a big jar and I don't usually use a whole lot of the gold, so this will last me a long time. I bought this at Truly Matte Plastics, so I have this and this is what I'm using, and it works great. What else do we need to talk about? Sometimes I use brushes when I want to manipulate my alcohol inks a little bit more, and then I will use these just for alcohol inks because it will destroy the bristles a little bit. So I just have some brushes set aside and I will use those. Don't use your good watercolor brushes on the alcohol inks, please. Today I'm gonna just try these first and see if this is something that will work for me and for what I'm feeling today. Usually I do a warm-up piece because it takes me a little while to get into it, especially if I haven't used it in a while. So maybe this will be my warm-up piece, maybe not. Maybe I'll create something incredible. So we don't know. This is one thing with alcohol inks that, it's very unpredictable and it will go places where you didn't want it to go. And when that happens, I will just let it do its thing. But once I start working on it, I will go a little bit more into detail. I'm gonna have to do a voiceover because I will be working with my hair dryer. I like to use heat because it just goes a little bit faster, and this is the hair dryer that I'm using, and it's also linked in the description below. So voiceover is next, so let's just jump in. Okay, I've talked enough. So this part is sped up a little bit, but I'm gonna leave the rest of the footage in real time so that you can really see how I move the colors around and how they start mixing together. I have cut out some of the placing of the colors and the IPA and the gold because that just seemed a little bit too repetitive to me, but everything else I left in. I also want to point out at this time that there are so many different ways of how you can work with alcohol inks. This is just my preferred method as of now. I might change it up a little bit, but in all honesty, the only time I'm actually using alcohol inks at this moment is to create backgrounds. I don't really make paintings with them. So when I say backgrounds, I mean I put down lots of different colors and then I cut them out and I either make magnets with it or other things. So for that, the process is a lot different. You should let me know in the comments if you want kind of a studio vlog of watching me make magnets and all the other things that I make, because I'd be more than happy to share that with you. But it's just something out of the ordinary, and I am not really sure if people want to see all that. So if there is an interest, then please let me know. So when I make an actual alcohol ink painting, I pretty much approach it the same way always, which is I need to figure out kind of where I want it to go. Like, what is the composition? It's very different from when I work with watercolors. I am much more play it by ear, whereas with the alcohol inks, I want to know a little bit where it's going to end up. Having said that, I don't have much control over it, as you are going to see a little bit later on when it's starting to take shape. You have to be very aware once you start putting down your colors and your IPA, because whatever you have done previously might get erased again by adding more colors. So I know I want some white space, but I also know that I want it to look a little bit more linear. And the best way I know how to approach this is by starting with a lighter color and then layering the other colors on top of it. I like the way this looks because it gives me these distinct layers and the overlapping and the saturation once the inks start to dry. I really like how that looks. You may also have noticed that I have not yet used the gold, and that is because some of the time it gets a little overwhelming when you add the gold, and by starting off without it, I am allowing myself to just focus on the lines first. The hairdryer that I'm using has 3 settings. One is a cool, slow blow setting. One is a warm or a heat slow blow setting, and one is a cool fast blow setting. And sometimes I get a little bit impatient and I use that third setting, but I have to be really careful because it will blow everywhere. So I don't really use any other form of blowing the inks around at this point, other than moving the paper and using the hair dryer. You have seen me also use brushes in the past, and while I like that approach as well, it feels a little bit less intuitive and a little bit more on purpose, almost like I am manipulating the ink a little bit more, like making it go a certain way. And it always depends on the composition. Sometimes that might look really great, and other times I decide against it and just use the air. And who knows, if I choose to work more with alcohol inks in the future, I just might go back to that technique. But for now, I am enjoying moving the colors around with the air. In the beginning, I have overdone it with the inks, meaning I had way too much ink on my paper. You really only need a little bit, especially if you are trying to achieve that wispy look that everybody likes a lot. So I am very aware of how much ink is on my paper, and I try to just use a minimal amount. And this is when you achieve that wispiness. It is very common for people that are new to it to really overdo it with the amount of ink that they put down. So if this is something that you're struggling with, try to just use drops at a time and use quite a bit of the IPA, and especially when you know that you're going to add the gold as well, then sometimes it is better to not shake the gold, especially if you just want minimal amount of gold. The moment you shake the bottle of gold up, that means more gold will come out. So I am also aware of that because I have overdone it with the gold as well. So now that I have a couple of the colors down and I am adding more, maybe you can see how the paper has stained a little bit where the IPA is lifting the color, meaning it will take the top layer of that ink off and you can use that to create a new shade or to incorporate that ink back into the fresh ink that you're laying down. But the paper has stained, and that will not come off on this type of paper. If you were to use the graphics paper, you could lift that up by, using your gloved hand and rubbing it off. This will not work on the photo paper. So this might be something that you need to be aware of, especially when you're trying to achieve the wispy look. You are going to need to learn how to move the ink quickly so it doesn't stain. The longer it sits on the paper, the more it will stain the paper, and then you have a hard time covering up those stains. You will notice I am trying to do this here. I am slowly starting to cover up some of those stains that I don't really want to be so visible. It's quite a juggling act because at the same time, I also don't want to disturb too much what I've already laid down. So I have to move the heat around, I have to move the ink around, and at the same time, try to cover up what I don't want seen so much, and also try to not disturb what I've already laid down. So it's sometimes a little bit harder to film because I want you guys to see it all, but at the same time, I also need to be very cautious of how I move the paper and where those inks are flowing. And many times I felt like I had ruined a piece because I wasn't paying attention where the ink was going and it was flowing onto areas that I really liked, and were now destroyed. And when that happens to you, my suggestion is to just try and keep an open mind. Alcohol inks are very hard to manipulate in the beginning, and they're still hard to manipulate for me, even though I have used it quite a bit now. But when I end up ruining one spot, sometimes it just turned out even better than it looked before. So I just need you to, just give yourself a little bit of grace and just see what happens. It is a very fluid medium in all the senses. And your mind and your approach needs to be able to adjust to that. Otherwise, it's going to be a very frustrating process for you, and I don't want that to happen to you. Now I have ink in the middle and I have some of it on the bottom, and I am trying to manipulate that middle section a little bit more to give it a little bit more of an angle without hopefully destroying what I've already put down. I also want to make sure that I maintain some of that negative space, meaning I want to keep some of that white. And it's a little bit harder the more you work on a piece. So I have to move very slowly and deliberately. I'm also aware of the color composition. I want to make sure that it looks good and that I have a good amount of the three colors so that they look harmonious and so that there is some sort of composition visible. Because I am not doodling over these pages, I want there to be enough interest that your eye will have lots of things to look at. And as I am slowly building up my layers, I want to make sure that I have these nice overlapping layers, the more saturated lines, and also the gold. I want there to be some of the gold, but I don't want that gold to be too overpowering. I kind of want that gold to settle into those lines as they are overlapping each other. All right, so now I flipped the page over and I want to work a little bit more on that middle section. I want to bring in some of that lighter blue, and I have to be very gentle blowing that ink around. And this is also one of the reasons why I wanted to keep this at normal speed, because I really want you to be able to see how slowly I move and how deliberate I am with laying down those inks. I have reached a point where I'm liking what I have worked on so far, and I can tell where the composition is going. And so now I'm just trying to add a little bit more ink to some of those white areas, because while I want the negative space, I don't want too much of it. After all, you want the alcohol inks to look at and not the white space. So I'm trying to achieve that wispiness. I kind of want that purple to come close to the other blue layer, but not so much. I ended up using quite a bit of that purple, and I'm a little worried that it was too much, so I might have to work on that a little bit more to make it wispy enough. So I'm gonna keep adding just gold and IPA here and just work with the ink that I have so as to not add, more ink than I really need. And that is another good tip that I can give you is to just use straight IPA and just work with the colors that are already on the paper. Sometimes that's all it needs. So I'm trying to lift some of that ink off the paper because I didn't quite like the way it looked, but you can see that it has already stained the paper, and so now I'm left with just working with what I've got. And how I do that is I have to add a little bit more blue, and I think I'm using the monsoon here, the slightly darker blue, and I want to create more wispiness, and I have to cover up what's already there. And by doing that, I am obviously reducing that negative space a little bit, but that's sometimes what I have to do in order to achieve the look that I'm going for. So this looks a little bit better, and I am happy with how this has turned out. So now I'm just trying to clean up a little bit more of that corner by adding just a little bit more of that blue. I'm still trying to lift some of that blue, although that is the fresher blue and it's a little bit easier to lift that off. But sometimes you're just gonna have to be happy with how it turns out and make it look like you intended to do that. Because it's a fine line of, do I go in and fix it, or and possibly ruin everything else, or do I just leave it and pretend that that's what I wanted to do? I am starting to walk a very thin line of when is too much, because I am still adding more of that blue because I just was not happy with how it dried. To be honest, I wanted more of that negative space when I first started, and the more I work with it, the more it's starting to diminish that negative space, and that is not what I had intended. But like I said in the beginning, sometimes you just have to keep working at it, and you might end up with something even better than you had thought. In the end, I was actually quite happy with how saturated that blue looked, but now I felt that I needed some of that purple to balance out that space a little bit. It was just a little bit too blue. So, because I had quite a bit of blue already down, I added just a little bit more of that purple to mix it in with the blue to give it the appearance of purple, but to also have those two colors mix and have it not so blue and not too purple either. I really liked how these two colors mixed, and I am happy with how it looks now. Can I still see some of those dried layers underneath? Yes, I can, but I'm just gonna have to leave it be now. So now I'm focusing my attention back on that corner because I just feel like it needs a little something more. In between working on the layers, I always look at the composition to see what else does it need. And by looking at it, it just felt a little bit too purple. So I'm still trying to fix some of those dried layers that I had put down because it's not quite as wispy looking as I had hoped it would look. And by adding more of that purple, I am just adding another layer. And then I realized it just looked a little bit too purple, so I added a little bit more blue to balance everything out. The good news is we're almost done, and in a moment here I will let you listen into what I had to say. All right, so let's have a closer look. Let me take this glove off first. So now that I feel like it's done, I don't really have room, nor do I want to mess up anything else that I have just put down here. I can, whoa, I just, close your containers when you're done, guys. I just made a mess. Oh. All right, what was I saying? I don't want to mess up what I have. I feel like it's got a good mix of white space and busy space. And now I can figure out, you know, which direction do I want it? Do I want it horizontal? Does it look better vertical? And in this case, I think like it's almost nicer as a vertical design. Some people go in and they paint their golden lines. Some people put some IPA on it and put some dots in. I could do that, but honestly, I like it the way it is. So I think I'm just gonna leave it like that. And I think it's almost harder to figure out when you're done with an alcohol ink piece than with a watercolor piece, because it's harder to go in and fix things, at least for me. So could I put more stuff on this? Sure. Could I intensify certain spots? Of course. But I'm also wary of messing up what I already have. The moment you put alcohol on it, you will erase what you've already put on, or you will mess it up. I had a little bit of a harder time covering up the stains from the paper that were left with the initial coats. So I think I am just going to leave it like that. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please let me know if you want to see more of this. There's, of course, so many different ways that you can work with alcohol inks. There's, different ways that you can work on paper even with alcohol inks. So I like the more linear stuff. I'm not too much into roses or even paint with alcohol inks. You can paint with it. You can make landscapes. You can do whatever. I like the abstract alcohol ink. And I have mentioned in previous videos that I don't like to put anything else on it, because when you go and look deeper into all of the different layers, there is so much you can discover that I find covering up with a marker or with more paint would just ruin it. So for me, I like it this way. I don't want to add anything else to it. I think it's gorgeous. The colors work really well, and this is where I'm gonna leave it. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it was different, but y'all asked for it, so I am here to deliver. Your wish is my command, basically, is what this channel is all about. So don't disappoint me. Watch this video. Let me know what you think. And tell me if you have tried alcohol inks before. Are you scared of it? Is there something else I can help you with in another video? We can make this a whole series if that's what you want. So again, thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in a video very soon.